Okay, so how did North Korea then actually get the bomb? And first of all, you have to have people trained. And that was done through the Soviet version of President Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace. In other words, we'll teach you all about these nuclear technologies if you promise to go the peaceful route. We did that with Tehran. We did it with many other countries. The Soviets did it with North Korea. So they trained their people. They came to Moscow. They came to Leningrad. And then the Soviets built the first small research reactor in Pyongyang, in Yangbyon, in North Korea. It's from having that research reactor, running that research reactor, that the North Koreans really learned the essential nuclear technologies of how to make a reactor. And then for a variety of reasons, and that is already starting after the Korean War, where they had the sense that they will need to develop the nuclear military capabilities, they decided to go alone, starting in the 1970s. And they did it under civilian cover because of the fact that there is this overlap in technologies, particularly in the fuel making between civilian and military. And what they did then, and one has to remember actually, in the 70s, North Korea was quite an up-and-coming industrialized country. It was actually farther ahead in industrialization than South Korea was at that time. So they had significant, heavy industry capabilities, and they just did it. They built it by themselves. They built the front end of the fuel cycle, what we call making the fuel. They built reactors. They actually had 3 under construction. One of them finished, a 5-megawatt reactor, which produced 5 megawatts electricity, but also, as a side product, produced 6 kilograms of plutonium a year, which essentially is 1 bomb's worth a year. And then they had 2 much bigger reactors under construction, one that would have made 10 bombs and another one that would have made 40 bombs worth a year. So that's what they had under construction going into the 1990s. And then they also built the back-end capabilities by building a reprocessing facility. Now, they did this themselves. They're very good at reverse engineering, and they had good models from the West, a reactor from England, a reprocessing facility from Belgium, and they made them work. But then they came upon very, very difficult times with the end of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. Essentially, the Soviet Union was a big benefactor. China had been a big friend. China decided that it needed to industrialize, hooked up with South Korea as much as with North Korea. And so they had enormous political concerns. And even though there were 2 years of great turmoil between 1992 and 1994, the North Koreans agreed under Kim Il-sung, essentially it was his deathbed wish as such, to reach an agreement in Geneva with the Americans, Koreans, South Koreans, and Japanese on what's called the Agreed Framework. And that lasted until 2002. And indeed, what the Agreed Framework did, mentioned these 3 reactors. The small that was operational, these 2 that were not completed. The Agreed Framework essentially had them abandon the 2 bigger reactor projects. And so that's a significant benefit of the diplomacy of having them freeze their plutonium program. However, what they did at the same time, I'll try to explain with this rather complicated slide, is they built in their own hedge, that while they were freezing plutonium, they were also exploring this second path to the bomb, and that is uranium enrichment. And that's what I show here in this diagram. I show you start with natural uranium, mostly uranium-238, a little 235. If you go in this direction, use heavy water or graphite to slow down the neutrons, you can use the natural uranium, make good plutonium. You can make a little bit of electricity, but not much. You mostly make good bomb-grade plutonium. That's what they were doing. But then if you go in this direction and enrich, let's say with centrifuges, then you can make low-enriched uranium, feed it into a commercial reactor, and you can make electricity and essentially have the waste or the spent fuel. So that's the legitimate route that countries like the United States and others have taken. However, if you continue along this path and you go from 3 to 5% to 90%, then you have the weapons capability. And that's what the United States had then accused North Korea of trying to develop. And they had enough information where North Korea was essentially out shopping for the key capabilities in terms of materials, supplies, and so forth to go the uranium enrichment route. And that happened during the Bush administration. In fact, very early on in the Bush administration, October 2002, they accused the North Koreans of going in that direction. The North Koreans then stepped back from that, walked away from the agreed framework, walked away from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which they had signed in 1985, and they went to proceed to build the bomb. And that's what they've done from essentially January 2003 on to the present. The enrichment program, they had denied the enrichment program, even though the Americans initially thought that in a meeting in 2002 that they had admitted it, but the North Koreans told me during my visits to North Korea that they never admitted it. They don't have a program. However, then they showed it to me and my colleagues in November of 2010, but by that time they claimed they had just happened to develop it. And my conclusion was, I don't believe that. The capability that they showed me could make enough low-enriched uranium for a small light water reactor that they were building themselves, or it could also make enough highly enriched uranium for essentially a bomb or a bomb and a half's worth a year. And I concluded when I came back in 2010 that most likely they were developing that facility for low-enriched uranium. However, we also thought quite certainly, especially with all the activities going on at the fuel fabrication plant, that they also have a covert facility someplace where you can take light-enriched uranium, put it into the other facility, and make high-enriched uranium. And so even though in 2002, when the Bush administration accused them, the Bush administration was then accused of having bad intel. I think they had good intel, they just made a bad decision to confront the North Koreans, allowed the North Koreans to walk away, and essentially did nothing in 2003 while they developed the bomb. So that's what happened. And indeed, they did have another agreement in 2005 to denuclearize, but the US sanctioned them just about as quickly as they signed this agreement, so the North Koreans walked away from the 2005 agreement and finally said, okay, we'll demonstrate to you Americans and the rest of the world that we can build a bomb. And they tested in 2006. It didn't work that well. They tested again in 2009, eventually again in 2013. They had also, I mentioned the delivery part. In the delivery part, they've been working on missiles for a long, long time. Essentially, the Soviets got them to start in the missile business. They know how to do short-range missiles. And they had been developing long-range missiles, but none of them flew successfully until 2012. So the story is that North Korea has been at this and was at it for more than 50 years. They developed that capability. By today, they probably have a handful of plutonium bombs. We don't know how many highly enriched uranium bombs. The guess is maybe also a handful. So they may have about 10 bombs today. They have so few successes in the missile business that's why I said they can't nuke the United States, at least with a missile. They could try a terrorist-type attack, but that's a whole different threat. So that's the essence of the story.